Okay, are we all set? Yeah, good. Well, wow, I honestly wasn't expecting the turnout that I see before me, so that's fantastic. I want to thank every one of you individually, personally, for coming out this evening on a snowy Wednesday evening, it turns out. And looking around the room, there's a lot of you who I don't know. So again, a special welcome to you for coming out here. My name's David Lim. I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Reading. I went back into education in 2006, 2007, and I completed a master's degree in renewable energy engineering. So for those of you who do know me, I can tell you where I've been hiding for the past year or year and a half, because this has taken up a significant portion of my life, to be honest. It's kind of everything's been on hold. I've really wanted to get to the bottom of this issue as a researcher. As some of you may know, there's a lot of disinformation out there regarding this subject. In 2010, I did some work for the Royal Academy of Engineering, and I was fortunate enough to speak abroad at some conferences. And this has to be, I can honestly say this, one of the hardest things to put together, one of the hardest talks, not least because it's a controversial subject, and also it's not my area of expertise. I have looked at this to a point, though, where I'm sufficient and comfortable enough to speak to you about what I've found. So I hope you will glean something from this. Geoengineering affects everybody. I think I put in my article, if you breathe, it affects you. So from children to the elderly. So when I've been putting this together, I've been wondering how I'm going to pitch it. Do I want to start at the base intro level, or the veterans in the subject who have looked into geoengineering and weather modification? So I've hit right at the base. So I've started right at the beginning. So I'm assuming that there are people out in the audience who know absolutely nothing about geoengineering. Having said that, I've looked around the room and I can see some very articulate, intelligent people. So I'm going to work you quite hard, and I make no apology for that, because there's a lot of information to get through. It's a huge, huge subject, and breaking it down into manageable chunks, putting it into plain English, has been interesting, to say the least. So, increases in extreme weather, food prices and illness. The unspoken connection is the title. Okay, so the journey. I've called it a journey as opposed to content. I think content alludes to the fact that there might be an ending, but I don't particularly want there to be an ending to this when you leave the hall this evening. I really hope, if I do my job well, to inspire you perhaps to look into some of this yourself, because I've learned from experience in this area, me telling you this means absolutely nothing unless you do something for yourself, unless you look, and I will direct you as to where to look, because it is a minefield. So I'm going to hit you straight with it up front, the unspoken connection. I'll give you some bullet points as to where we're going with this. Then I'm going to have a chat about the government and where they rely on the governance issues of geoengineering. Then I'm going to show you a few photographs of what it looks like. And then talk about the impacts. And then this huge question that everybody's asking, why are they doing it? Why is this happening to us? I'm going to help you navigate those murky waters with the research and point you in some directions and describe to you what's happening out there. And then I'm going to end up with some good news. Unconventionally, I'm going to start with a thought experiment with all of you, okay? So just roll with me on this. So, as and when you're comfortable, I want you to close your eyes I want you to imagine that you've woken up and there's a letter on on the box or on the floor, and you open the letter and it's a random invitation to a Queen's garden party. The date on the top of the letter is in black, and it says 1959. And you think, oh, this is kind of interesting, I'm going to accept. So you doll yourself up, you put on your best gear, and a chauffeur car greets you, takes you to London, to Buckingham Palace Gardens, and there you are, canapes flowing, champagne, guys walking around, and you're leaning up against the side of a corridor of a marquee. It's a beautiful marquee. And you overhear a conversation. You overhear two dapper-looking chaps in military uniform. And they're talking about potentially spraying the whole of Dorset with carcinogenic particulate material from aircraft. And you think, no, this can't be real. So you wheedle in a bit closer and you glean a bit more of the conversation, and they're talking about using aircraft, they're talking about the load quantities. Fast forward now, you're on the way home and you're thinking, no, this can't be real, but yet you've heard something. You've got this information that everybody's going to be sprayed. And you think to yourself, how the hell am I going to articulate this information to people? What am I going to say? And I want you to think about that for a second. What am I going to say, and what is the response from the people who I engage with? Will I be ridiculed? How are they going to accept this information? Are they going to think I'm mad? Okay, now, I want you to open your eyes now. I hope you kind of got that mental picture there, because that's exactly where I am now with this. And that's where a lot of people are with this. Okay, I'm going to hit you with it. Increases in extreme weather events, food prices, and illness. A few bullet point facts. I'm not going to labour these. UK. So we've had the hottest April on record, 2011. We've had the coldest December on record, 2010. Can you remember that? The driest spring in southern England on record, again, 2011. The wettest English year, 2012. That was last year. And I breeze across that, wettest year. That caused so many people so much heartache with flooding. The dullest June since 1909, 2012. The Environmental Agency put out 266 flood warnings or thereabouts last year. And a little quiz question for you. In the US, anybody hazard a guess at how many total temperature records were broken? 2012, we had the Texas droughts and what have you. 1,000?
I was going to say 10.
20,000? 40,000 individual temperature records were broken last year in the States. Food prices. Food price expenditure as a proportion of disposable income increased between 10 and 14% in the past 5 years. Hedge fund investments have risen from $50 to $400 billion over the past, 1999 to 2011. The Reuters Food Index has risen by more than 10% as well, and that's due to rising demand, commodity speculations, and various supply problems. And that's very key, supply problems. And what a lot of people haven't heard about is the food rioting in Haiti. And Lord Monckton, I think, presents some information on this, and they talk about the people in Haiti not being able to afford mud pies. Pies partly made from mud. Illness, and this is a biggie. 800,000 dementia sufferers in the UK at the moment, and that's expected to double, or just over double actually, to 1.7 million in the next 40 years. Alzheimer's, I think, speaks for itself. I think many people who I've spoken to have had people who with Alzheimer's or friends of friends. A global asthma epidemic is hitting us. Vitamin D deficiency. So 50% of ethnic whites are lacking vitamin D, and 90% in the black and Asian groups. Childhood rickets has made a comeback. The last time we saw childhood rickets or heard about it was the children down the coal mine, I believe. And again, childhood autism is increasing significantly. So I think you've all got it by now. What connects them is this thing called geoengineering. It's one answer anyway. And it's a term that you probably haven't heard about if you're not in this field. And there's a reason for that, and I'll come to that later. So extreme weather events are increasing because our weather is being manipulated. Food prices are increasing because crop production can be controlled. And illness is increasing because geoengineering chemicals are toxic. So there you have it. There's a snapshot of what the whole evening is going to be about. Okay, geoengineering and government. I'm not making it up. There is this thing called geoengineering. The House of Commons have got a paper on it. The regulation of geoengineering came out in 2010. And the definition in this document says geoengineering is activities specifically and deliberately designed to effect a change in the global climate with the aim of minimizing or reversing anthropogenic climate change. Anthropogenic being man-made. Bit wordy, I think. The other definition I prefer is from the Royal Society. And this document, Geoengineering the Climate, came out in 2009. And they define it as the deliberate large-scale intervention in the Earth's climate system in order to moderate global warming. And the red writing you see at the bottom there is the Solar Radiation Management Governance Initiative, which the Royal Society are funding. Methods. We've got some numerous methods. They break down into two: solar radiation management and carbon dioxide removal. Huge topic. I could be here for hours talking about it all. We're only going to look at two, and that's the aerosol, stratospheric injection of aerosols, and cloud seeding. This is quite key as well, so if you can get this under your belt, I'm really going to try with you on this. Geoengineering is part of a bigger sphere of science. I've termed it environmental manipulation. The other two spheres, this is a Venn diagram, military operations and weather modification. Now, weather modification is an industry in its own right. It's very old, actually. Weather modification goes way back. Earliest references I found are 1891. Vincent Schaefer looked into cloud seeding technologies and progressed it hugely by 1946. Military operations. So part of geoengineering is tied in with military. Part of military alters and modifies our weather. And by definition, geoengineering is modifying our weather. So depending on what context we're talking, and I'll steer you through this, whether it's geoengineering, weather modification, or military operations. Okay. Back to our thought experiment. I'm just going to cut into a little, I hope this goes okay, a little video clip.
Can tonight reveal the true extent of germ warfare tests carried out in the southwest. Government's documents show much of North and South Devon and parts of Somerset were used for experiments similar to those conducted off the Dorset coast during the 1960s.
An independent inquiry has already been ordered into the Dorset trials to determine whether or not they've affected people's health. In a few minutes, we'll be speaking exclusively to the man in charge of this inquiry. But first, our environment correspondent, Simon Wall, has this special report, which includes film of the trials never previously seen on television.
germ warfare trials carried out in the 1960s and 70s were highly secret. This previously unreleased film of the experiments as they happened. Their existence was revealed last year when secret documents were declassified. They were thought to be carried out mainly in Dorset. A spotlight investigation has, though, discovered they were far more widespread than was previously thought. Other trials tested how the germs would survive in different conditions in different areas. These were based not on releasing a gas, but instead on exposing a narrow thread of material coated with E. coli to the air. These tests were carried out in January 1967. The threads were exposed first from a ship just off Ilfracombe, then on 5 other sites, running through Somerset down to the sea off Dorset.
I want you to hold that in your thoughts for just a second. So that was E. coli, bacteria.
First tonight, Spotlight can reveal the Dorset village, which has suffered a series of birth defects, was exposed to enormous quantities of chemicals in 1959. Families in East Lulworth are already demanding a public inquiry into germ warfare tests carried out in the 60s. Now, documents show chemicals were dumped by aircraft over Dorset in quantities that were up to 1,000 times greater than the rest of the country. Our environment correspondent Simon Hall has this exclusive report.
The aim of the airborne tests was the same as those carried out from ships, to examine how vulnerable Britain was to a germ warfare attack. This, though, is the first time a chemical known to be toxic was used, zinc cadmium sulfide. Scientists say the cadmium is the most worrying component. It is carcinogenic, and studies have shown it can cause birth defects in rats. It's unclear if it could have the same effect in humans.
Its health effects include damage to the lungs, kidneys, and to the liver, and also cancer of the lungs and prostate have been found.
The test was carried out in August 1959. A plane flew above the North Sea, then along the English Channel, spraying the chemical. Typical numbers of particles detected were 0, 1, 8, 12, and a maximum of 38. But when the plane reached the end of its track, something happened. That resulted in Dorchester sampling 4,315 particles. There was no sample point at East Lulworth, but it lies directly in the chemical's path.
Okay, so the date on top of the letter I described was 1959. Yeah. So I got an apology. It's a kind of bit of a wacky thought experiment because it was real. They've done it to us before. I and many believe that it's happening to us again. The Guardian broke this in 2002. The headline reads, "Millions were in germ war tests." The Ministry of Defence turned large parts of the country into a giant laboratory to conduct a series of secret germ warfare tests on the public. And the article goes on, and I can give you all of the links to everything I'm talking about is referenceable, and you can have this. I won't labour this slide, but the two clips you saw were the first two, the fluorescent particle trials, the large area coverage trials, the zinc cadmium sulfide so it's all kind of colour coordinated. So the red is the E. coli and Bacillus globuli, which is the anthrax mimicking spore. Sabotage trials were the transport. So they released chemicals into carriages, in the underground, I believe, as well, on the underground. And I've called this, the other one, the spider's web trials. What they did is put germs onto spiders' webs and release them into the atmosphere just to see what the outcome would be. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. So I went digging. And again, I'll give you links to all of these. And I came across and found all of the unclassified documents. And if that wasn't bad enough, with the bacteria, in 2001, the BBC broke this story, rainmaking link to killer floods. you remember the Lim floods? Some of you maybe, yeah, 1952, just up the road from here more or less. 35 deaths in the infamous Lim flood disaster came only days after RAF rainmaking experiments over southern England, it has emerged. And then it goes on to talk about 90 million tonnes of water swept down the narrow valley, destroying buildings. Right. What do you think the official government's position is on geoengineering? Don't panic. We're only considering geoengineering chemicals. No activity is taking place at the moment. People have written to their MP, and the standard reply is that no activity's been taking place. They have no reason to believe that chemtrails are being sprayed in our skies. So what does it look like? So for those of you who haven't, I'm talking about the aerosol part of geoengineering now. This is in China.
Could you, sorry.
Yes. Sorry. That's in China. That's in the States. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you might think that's just normal sky. That's in Europe. A bit closer to home, London, Trafalgar Square. See a nice horizontal trail there. Anybody hazard a guess where this one is? 200 metres behind me, in a field, looking west. Not one cloud in that sky is natural. This was one of the worst days I've ever seen in Trent, and this only happened 2 weeks ago. It was on the 15th of March, and again, the only cloud that's natural is this little grey area here. The rest of the sky was covered in this murky haze. And to just hit home the point a bit, a bit more, this one is 50 metres that way in the car park, just outside here. And I'll show you those three little, almost look like claw lines across there. I'll show you where they came from. So, everyone's asking, what are they? What are these trails in the sky? In 2005, NASA came out with a document differentiating the types of trails. Some were short-lived, they say, others were kind of persistent and persistent spreading. Now, they have changed slightly on their definition of this, but it's just to illustrate that NASA themselves are making a differentiation. The word chemtrail, if anyone says to you, it's a made-up word or whatever, US Congress made up the term chemtrail initially. House Bill 2977, the Space Preservation Act 2001, page 5, line 15, it's there. It's there under exotic weapons, exotic weapon systems, chemtrails. Okay, so this is a static. It just shows you the chemtrail or persistent contrail, and there's a raging debate as to what to call them. As a scientist, they can't be called chemtrails. No academic journal will look at you seriously if you call them chemtrails. So you have to call them persistent contrails or cirrus-induced cloud contrails. So a normal contrail should dissipate after about 30 seconds, 20 minutes or so. They are ice crystals, water, carbon dioxide, a bit of sulfur. But the things that we're seeing in the skies nowadays linger for a lot longer. NASA is on record saying that some of the chemtrails will last about 20 hours. And just to kind of demonstrate that is not all photoshops, I'm going to flick to a video. Do you remember the 3 lines that I said that were going across just out there the other day? So the top one, you'll see, is a chemtrail or persistent contrail. The middle one is an old chemtrail. It's turning into a big fluffy cloud. And the bottom one you'll see is a normal contrail, a vapor trail.
It's the 5th of March.
I might cut the audio on this and talk you through it instead. I'm sorry for the quality of the image. I don't know why it's doing this. I think it might be the projector. But the top one you see is a slightly different colour as well. It's more bluish in colour. You can see it starts way back to the north. They look fluffier. They obviously last longer in comparison to this very thin normal contrail at the bottom, which is already dissipating here. And as it goes into the cloud, I flick back and show you the chemtrail. So essentially, they have very different characteristics. This is a chemtrail up close. Some of them have funny bursts in. This is quite a common one you'll see. Different colours. Some of them are slightly bluish in tinge. This is a great shot actually. Somebody's managed to get a shot of a chemtrail up close. And you know, is it me or does it look like something's falling from that trail? This is a normal contrail type. This is what they should be. Some of them are slightly fluffier, depending on the weather conditions. It has to be minus 38, 40 degrees centigrade, with the various moisture content as well. There. The other characteristic is that they turn on and off. You might see some planes. There's numerous clips on the internet with them turning on and off. And they are being used as atmospheric test markers. And when you get into this subject in detail, you find out that they turn on and off in specific points. They're believed to be controlled by satellite, a lot of them. So these points here will actually go into a meteorological model as data points. And as you expect, they should and do show up on satellite imagery. So all of the lines there just off the west coast of Cornwall going up towards Newcastle, all of that is man-made cloud, essentially. When you go out and it's cloudy, you can't see what's going on. But I can guarantee activity is sometimes still going on. You sometimes see a break in the cloud and you can see the trail. Some of you may have experienced that. So when you come, I made a geoengineering diary, actually. I think I had about 17 days in December last year. But a lot of that time I couldn't see what was going on. So it was probably more. So this is what's happening. The chemtrails, persistent contrails, are being taken, some of them, by the wind, depending on the regime, and it's creating artificial cloud cover. And the last clip I'm going to show you is of a time-lapse video. Now this is I think it's in Barcelona. It's sped up, obviously, so you can see the effect. And there's a mixture in here of chemtrails and normal contrails. So you'll see the lines. There's a star there. Did you see that? So where they cross, that will be a data value in a model somewhere. A good researcher, Scott Stevens, who's a meteorologist who's into this phenomena. He talks about the data values going into the models. They're called tracers, actually. See, that was a normal. Did you see that? That was a normal contrail. That's a normal contrail just gone by then. There's a lovely one here, actually. I think it's this one here. You can see it curling round. So, geoengineers are telling us that man-made cloud is necessary to deflect sunlight away from the Earth, to cool us down, essentially. And I'll pull apart that argument slowly as we go through this. Right. Okay. Commercial airline. When I showed this to my wife, she said, "Oh, they've forgotten a passenger." No, they're obviously military. Flight tracker, you can track commercial airline on Flight Tracker 24, and a lot of the movements in the sky you can't see them on the on this tracker software, so they have to be military. KC-135s, KC-130, KC-10s, Boeing 747s. These are the aircraft types that are commonly being reported. However, commercial airlines also leave chemtrails, and I'll get into that in a bit more in a moment. This is, I must say, this is circumstantial evidence. This is unconfirmed. However, these do demonstrate the ability to outfit an aircraft with carrying capacity for liquids. This one's circulating on the internet, and you see people saying, no, this is in a factory. It's in a factory. But when, again, you look in detail at some of the letters and the wording and the backgrounds, you follow this patent through. This is US patent 7413145B2, and it leads to this. So, and this is an aerial delivery system. Okay, somebody asked me earlier about HARP. HARP is an acronym. It stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program or Project. This is a ground-based technology. It became live in 1999. I think the first array became live. And what they are, they're 70. Each aerial is 72 feet high. There's about 150 to 180 in an array, and these things are about 2 or 3 times the area of a football field. And they beam into the ionosphere between 1 to 3.5 billion watts of radio energy. So what this does, it changes the characteristics of the ionosphere. So if you can imagine like a heat column going up there. And as many of you might know, the jet streams, there are 3 major jet streams that go around the planet. And when the jet stream comes into contact or nears this rush of heat, it has to go either way. It doesn't like going through it, so it has to go round. And that's how you can start to push the jet streams north or south. And when the radio energy hits clouds, these are the type of cloud conditions that it makes. So it's like a rippling, like a mackerelling, or like a corrugated effect. Here's one with a chemtrail running through it. This one's kind of interesting. Very pillowy-like clouds with a definite edge. If I was doing a modeling simulation of this cloud using computational fluid dynamics, you would not have this phenomena occurring unless that there was an external stimuli, this arching effect. It doesn't happen in a liquid unless there's something making it. Punch hole cloud. So again, you see the rippling effects with this big hole in the middle. Okay, now I'm going to move on to some impacts, talk about the impacts of geoengineering. So everyone's saying, what's in these aerosols? What's being sprayed? The Royal Society say we're spraying, or thinking about spraying, sulfur dioxide. However, they've changed it slightly. I'm up here now. Geoengineering, sulfur dioxide. David Keith's on record. David Keith is a geoengineer pushing this thing forward. And he's saying, we're thinking about using aluminium oxide now because of the volumetric radiative forcing properties. Lighter, probably cheaper, and more effective. Barium, strontium, and salt. Proposals have been put forward to actually put seawater into the clouds to make them more reflective. Moving on to weather modification. Silver iodide. They knew about this stuff back in the 40s. Again, barium, nitrogen, nanosilver, and p-dichlorobenzene. And on the military side of things, you have aluminium-coated fiberglass, and these are put out for radar, fuzzing, noise, and barium salts. The two at the bottom, sulfur hexafluoride and trimethylaluminium, is what is being added to normal jet fuel, and they have neurological effects. They cause short-term memory and all sorts. Again, all on record. So the other chemicals and particles, thorium, cadmium. Cadmium was the one, cadmium sulfide within the clip, carcinogenic. Chromium, potassium, titanium, magnesium. Arsenic's been found, manganese, lead. In total, 49 different chemicals have been reported. Okay, there are 3 other class of particulates that are being found. Polymer nanofibers, desiccated erythrocytes, and erythrocytes are freeze-dried red blood cells, mold spores, and fungus. So for the aim of this talk, I'm not going to go into those areas. I may do another talk in the future where I unpack that a bit more. So yeah, what goes up must come down. So as you can imagine, it's landing in our oceans, it's landing in our rivers, watercourses, in our soils, our crops, trees, bees. People have been wondering where they've been going. Livestock, our pets, and if it's landing all of this, landing on all of that, what else is it landing on? And this is for me, all of it's horrific, but it's landing on us as well. So the environmental impacts, we're seeing acidification of our oceans. The soil pHs are becoming slightly more alkali. Our crop is starting to suffer in different ways with adiabatic stress. The yields are reported to be lower in many instances. There's a phenomenon, especially in the States, where trees are dying. Aluminium is bad for the ozone, air quality, marine life, and of course our pollinators. And out of all of those, for me, and this is where it kind of really strikes a chord for me, you can choose what you drink. You can drink tap water, fluoridated. You can drink spring water. You can drink beer. You can drink whatever you want. You can eat. You can even have a choice what you eat. Organic, non-organic, prepared foods. You can't choose what air you breathe, can you? And to think somebody has that power to take whatever they want and put in the atmosphere, and you have no autonomy whatsoever over this. And for me, when I really understood that, it was like, it's bam, the gravity and the magnitude of the situation hits you. You feel helpless, actually. Some people don't care about the environmental stuff because it doesn't affect them personally. When this stuff happens, they start to take notice sometimes. So on the milder end of the impacts, people are suffering from headaches, from colds. People are suffering from colds, for 3 weeks now. I had a 3-week cold in January. Sinus problems, increased susceptibility to viruses, asthma, childhood asthma, muscle weakness, eye and skin irritation, autoimmune. Now, autoimmune, I could, again, unpack and come up with a huge list of things. Aluminium has been linked to neurological and cognitive dysfunction, short-term memory loss, SAD, seasonal affective depression, chronic bronchitis, liver damage, and again, 2 biggies coming up, Alzheimer's. Again, aluminium-related, some people say dementia. Barium is not good for the heart, cardiac system, and the big C. So I'm going to focus on just 3 elements. First one I'm going to focus on is the aluminium oxide, Al2O3. Now we can intake aluminium through food, through breathing, and actually just through skin contact. The average hair is between 70 and 100 microns, so a tenth of the width of a human hair the dimensions, the magnitudes that we're talking about here. So, damage to the central nervous system, dementia, Alzheimer's we've covered, short-term memory loss, lethargy, people waking up and just melancholy, not wanting to do much, severe trembling, pulmonary fibrosis, and lung damage have all been associated with aluminium and aluminium oxide. Next on the list is barium. Barium is extremely soluble in water, so constant exposure hits our immune system for 6. It increases blood pressure. Weak and aching muscles have been associated with barium. I think I suffer from that sometimes. You know, when you wake up, you're all achy and it feels like you've done a couple of marathons and you've just been sitting at your desk all day the day before. Stomach irritation, changes in nerve reflexes, difficulties in breathing, asthma again. Barium also depletes our potassium levels. And again, on the lesser end, let's say, the headaches, dry eyes, and the sore and raspy throats. The last chemical we look at is sulfur. Now, sulfur, we need sulfur actually, but derivatives of sulfur, like sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, are not good for us. Again, so this interacts with our neurological pathways and our synaptic pathways, changes in behaviour, disturbances in blood circulation again, like barium, heart damage. It affects our eyesight, our reproductive system, again, our immune system, stomach, liver, kidneys, hearing, hormonal metabolism, and dermatological effects. A neurologist from the US, Dr. Blaylock, is on record saying, when talking about chemtrails, he was saying, I took these stories with a grain of salt, like many of us do initially. And then he goes on to say, my major concern is that there is evidence that they are spraying tons of nano-sized aluminium compounds. Then he goes on to say, of special concern is the effect of these nanoparticles on the brain and spinal cord, as a growing list of neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig disease, are strongly related to the exposure of environmental aluminium. Okay, whether you believe the whole man-made climate change thing, or whether you believe the chemicals are bad or good, irrefutable is the fact that we are having reductions in radiation, in sunlight. No, you can't dispute that. So what is the effect of reduced sunlight? Just that factor alone. Increased molds, increased mildew, greater susceptibility to viruses again, reduced crop yields. Studies in Illinois University have shown, everything else being equal, all the climate conditions, reduced yields. Ecosystems. Nearly every ecosystem relies on photosynthesis at some level. So just that ring alone, you could say, this is big stuff. SAD again, people constantly being under this blanket of cloud. It's a lot worse in London, apparently, than it is out here. Vitamin D again, so the whole vitamin D, rickets thing, strong bones and teeth. And this one's a bit odd as well, solar PV. So you have government pushing renewable energy technologies, solar PV, we're having huge investment of solar over the past few years, but yet people are reporting 40, 50, 60% drop in solar output from this excess cloud cover. And yep, organisations are reporting on it. The BBC in 2005, why the sun seems to be dimming. In this article it says there was a staggering 22% drop in sunlight, so that's average, falling by 10% in the US, 30% in former Soviet Union, and 16% in the British Isles. Dimming appears to be caused by air pollution. Our Met Office has now got a global dimming section on the website. It's got an aerosol research manager, Dr. Jim Hayward. So if all of this is happening, wouldn't you expect to find stuff in test samples? You would expect to find some of this, some of the events, kind of spiking on graphs where heavy spray days are occurring, with drinking water and our rain, air and soil. Human samples have been tested, blood and hair. this is what we're finding. This is what we're finding. Most of the tests so far, the body of research is being conducted in the United States. We are a little bit behind on the testing. But essentially, I've just pulled out a few. I'll give you some references to loads of test results. But I think you're doing amazingly well for your attention at the moment. So I'm not going to labour this. Rain and snow samples. No aluminium is meant to be found in rain, really. It just doesn't. It's not naturally occurring. So normal rain levels are between 0 to 0.5 micrograms per litre. And in the red, you see some quite startling results. Barium also. So in Lincolnshire, we had 70 micrograms. In Portsmouth, there was 350 micrograms reported. Drinking water again, safe levels, 0.05 milligrams per litre, or 50 micrograms per litre. This is a test result from, I think this is a New Zealand one. So 0.19 micrograms per litre on the upper end of the limit. This is an air sample from the States, the Phoenix. The blue bars you can see are the actual reading from the test, and these tiny little black bar lines are the MCL, which is the maximum contaminant level, or the toxic limit. And again, I'm not going to go into that. I think it speaks for itself, really. Okay, this is the big one. Why? Everybody's asking, why are they doing this? Why? Why would the government be doing this to us? So, I believe that the sales pitch to us is, due to man-made global warming, the planet needs to be cooled. That's what the IPCC are saying, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're saying we need excess cloud cover to bounce the sunlight, redirected out back into space. However, the climate change science isn't settled. And this is where I've jumped into it from my research. From looking at the IPCC models with my mathematical modelling of domestic energy use, the IPCC is a kind of political organisation. It's not scientific. And this is the big risk, when you start marrying political and academic spheres, when policy is funding academia, you're going to get political-driven outcomes. You can't access the original data from the IPCC meteorological climate models. It's lost, it's gone missing. We've had ClimateGate 1 with the hacked emails, and there was a ClimateGate 2 actually. I don't know if many of you know about that. So for me, it doesn't fit. Something doesn't feel right. It's not going right. And when I looked around the subject, and this is the other thing, it's an epistemological issue. Epistemology being how we know what we know. And you have to fit, I've learned that you have to fit everything into context. So you look at climate and then you think, hang on a minute, how does this fit into the wider scheme of things, history, geopolitics, and other issues? Because compartmentalization is a huge, powerful driver in this field. And this is why a lot of professional people don't know about this stuff. It's because they're being compartmentalized. Compartmentalization is everybody working on a kind of need-to-know basis. I kind of view it as a honeycomb structure, where everyone's in their little honeycomb, being busy, going away, coming back again. And what I've been doing over the past year is walking on that little thin edge, looking down at everyone doing their own little thing, and then you put the pieces together and you think, hang on a minute, it's not working, something's not quite right. This is an interesting one I came up with, and many people have sourced this. This is a report by the Club of Rome. It came out in 1991, and if you haven't come across this, it's quite an interesting read. It's called The First Global Revolution, and the UN think tank was tasked with the idea of coming up with various schemes to unite humanity, basically. It came up with it had other aims and objectives as well. Depopulation was another one. On page 75, under the heading, "The Common Enemy of Humanity is Man," quote, "In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like, would fit the bill." Some of you have come across this. And then it goes on to say that all of these are kind of human-induced, therefore humanity itself is its own enemy. And I know from a psychological background, as soon as you kind of make people feel guilty, how easy is it to control them, using their guilt against them? So just a quick recap. They're saying we need to cool the Earth, the deliberate intervention in the Earth's climate to moderate global warming, the definition of geoengineering, through solar radiation management, aerosols reflecting light. But NASA came out in 2005 with a newsletter saying persistent jet contrails forming man-made clouds and haze are, quote, "trapping warmth in the atmosphere and exacerbating, making it worse, global warming." You twin that with this study from Mark Jacobson from Stanford University, and it reads, "Atmospheric scientists at Stanford University, California, show that aircraft vapor trails," so we're talking about normal contrails, produce between 15 and 20% of the warming in the Arctic. So again, just to kind of break that down into plain speak, plain English, government scientists are saying more man-made clouds plus more aviation emissions equals cooling. It doesn't add up. Clouds perform two functions. They do indeed reflect solar radiation, but they also act, as some of you know, as a blanket around the globe. So the radiative forcing, the difference between the heat emitting from the Earth and that coming in, it has two forces. And there are numerous studies that say, yeah, putting more clouds is actually going to make us warmer. Okay, so we're getting there. I'm getting to the knockout punch. Why else would they do it? Why else would government geoengineers be doing this if the science doesn't stack up? The first agenda, first and foremost, I think, is to control the weather. And when you can control the weather through various means, you can start to manipulate public opinion with certain things, like getting people to buy into the idea of man-made climate change. I'm not saying man-made climate change, we are, and you have to pick it apart really carefully. Man-made, man. Which men, people? Is it the public? Is it government? Social control mechanism. So when you can control the weather, you can put upon society some very rigid social controls. Control food supply and cost. We all need food. Corporate profit. There are corporate profit motives that I'll show you in a minute to this. Enhance military capability. I think we touched upon it with the HARP and the radar noise. And geopolitical agendas. And these are just some of them. And these are the main kind of 7 that I've identified. So do you remember the Venn diagram with the geoengineering, the weather modification? So weather modification is an industry in its own right. If you have enough money, you can actually pay a weather modification company in the States to fly over your town, your county or your state to modify the weather. Modify it to create extreme weather. You can create floods, droughts. If you seed the sky with particulates that are so fine, the water molecules cannot create the mass to bring them down again. So it kind of dissipates the rain, as so to speak. Storms, hurricanes. Military can now steer hurricanes. And there's a paper on steering hurricanes. Erosion. hail damage, blizzards, so again snow, excess snow, and when you have droughts, of course, we have water shortages. And when I look at this, it kind of rings a bell as to what's been going on recently. So, you can manipulate public opinion, you can convince people of climate change, and if you can do that, you can impose carbon taxes. There's the cap and trade scheme where companies are allowed a certain quota, and if they go above that, they have to pay fines or not fines. They have to buy credits. Personal carbon taxes. Australia are having some tough times with personal carbon taxes at the moment. Personal carbon taxes, you know, everything you do. If you step in a car, if you take a flight somewhere, you'll be penalised. Agenda 21. Those of you who know about Agenda 21 will know that this document does not leave out anything in modern society at the moment. It's another talk in its own right, but essentially it's there to facilitate the management of resources, people, population. Okay, so I'm getting onto the weather derivatives now. You can bet on the weather through the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. You can bet on the weather through insurances. If you're a farmer, you can insure, let's say, 1 acre of crop. Let's say that 1 acre can make you £100. You can insure it for £1,000. So if you have knowledge on a large scale, if you have knowledge of how the weather regimes are going, you can make some serious money. Commodities trading on the futures market, again. This is a little page from, a little diagram from the CME, and it talks about there being nearly 1 million contracts by 2008, so there's probably well over 1 million now. WSI is a company I just picked out the hat as a weather kind of trading company. So it reads here, the only thing more powerful than weather, this is their homepage, is our ability to help you profit from it. And this is one from The Independent. It reads, Goldman bankers get rich betting on food prices as millions starve. In the States, energy companies already modify the weather. So again, if you can create prolonged periods of cold weather, so you're just hitting, you know, the degree days are going up or down depending on whether, you know, extremes. When it's hot, you've got air conditioning. When it's cold, obviously we need heat. Agrochemical companies. There are 10 agrochemical companies that run pretty much the whole business. Some of you are familiar with Monsanto, I'd imagine. And what Monsanto are doing, they're bringing out patents, seed patents. They're bringing out aluminium-resistant seed patents, sorghum seed patents. And for me, this is the daddy of all patents. This is a stress-tolerant plants and methods thereof. And it talks about adiabatic stress in plants. And if you like any of these foods, this is in the patent, they're proposing to genetically modify these seeds. So as a farmer, you are farming organic or natural seeds, and if you're having your harvesting patterns interrupted through adverse weather, the only way you can survive is to either go GM or you start diversifying. And going GM probably is on the cards for many farmers. And again, GM's a whole nother topic for another day, perhaps. There are many studies talking about GM foods being associated with many negative health impacts. So there's, again, a corporate profit motive within the agrochemical industry. This is a quote by Dr. Vandana Shiva. She's a renowned physicist in India. She talks about Monsanto. She says, if they, Monsanto, control seed, they control food. They know it. It's strategic. It's more powerful than bombs. It's more powerful than guns. This is the best way to control populations of the world. Social control. Going into a bit of sensitive, awkward territory here. The Kissinger report came out in 1974. the NSSM, the National Security Study Memorandum. Quote, since population growth is a major determinant of increases in food demand, allocation of scarce resources should take account of what steps the country is taking in population control, as well as food production. In these sensitive relations, however, and this is it is important, in style as well as substance, to avoid the appearance of coercion. So what they're saying is, we have to avoid being seen to manipulate the food because we want to manipulate the population. Again, it's a huge topic, depopulation. Agenda 21, I think I mentioned before, and this policy document came out of the Rio Summit in 1992. Essentially, it was to achieve sustainable development through the management of natural resources and population, using land use restrictions and requirements. And it had some goals, and the decisions from this policy should be based on environmental impact through three main components: global land use, global education, and here's the biggie, global population control and reduction. A quote from Dr. John Holdren, and he is the science advisor to President Obama. Quote, a program of sterilizing women after their second or third child, despite relatively greater difficulties of the operation than vasectomy, might be easier to implement than trying to sterilize men. Quite, yeah, it raises a few eyebrows, I'd imagine, when people read that. And if you Google, depopulation quotes, or if you get into it, there is a credible literature out there talking about depopulation. Enhanced military capability, another agenda. And then the famous weather modification experiments were during the Vietnam War, called Operation Popeye, and they flew 2,600 rainmaking missions over the Ho Chi Minh Trail to create adverse conditions, flooding, so they could disrupt the food supplies coming in. And the slogan at that time within the US soldiers was "Make mud, not war." And the planes they used were the WC-130As. And again, I'll give you links to all of this. Here's an interesting one. The US Air Force came out with a report. You can't see the title there, so I've blown it up for you. Weather as a force multiplier, owning the weather in 2025. What can you do if you own something? You can sell it. You can sell the weather. I haven't heard much about selling weather, but my gut is telling me that it might be around. I wish I'd covered this up, the date here. Some of you have seen it. Others are engaging even in an eco-type of terrorism, whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves. And if you haven't seen the date, 97. I found a similar quote, actually, going back to 1975, where they talk about we can create hurricanes and we can steer hurricanes and we need a treaty. And there's in 1978, there was the Environmental Modification Treaty that was ratified by many countries, saying that we can't use this technology. It's just, it's too dangerous. Scalar weaponry, it's called. And a lot of the geoengineering stuff was born from this. There's a model out there called the Variable Terrain Radio Parabolic Equation Model. And this was the kind of embryo for a lot of the experiments and geoengineering stuff that I'm talking about. Telegraph, May 2011. It reads, Mohammed Ahmadinejad says, Europe stealing Iran's rain. And it goes on to say, he speaks, he quotes, it says, according to reports on climate, whose accuracy has been verified, European countries are using special equipment, I'll get to that in a minute, to force clouds to dump. And he's talking about water, rain. By doing so, they prevent rain clouds from reaching regional countries, including Iran. The special equipment that he's alluding to is the HARP stuff, is the scalar weaponry. HARP can create earthquakes and tsunamis, actually. You'd expect whistleblowers to be in this kind of field. You know, one of the questions I get is, you know, if all this is going on, you know, how comes nobody's stepping forward? If this is so big, how comes nobody's coming forward? Well, there have been. People have come forward on this. And a very, very courageous Swedish politician, Pernilla Hagberg, came forward. And she says, quote, "These trails contain a multitude of chemicals, viruses and heavy metals such as aluminium that influence the weather. This is a controversial and extremely sensitive issue that is very interesting to examine. I know there are several politicians who want to, but do not dare." And this is the geopolitical bit. To be able to control the weather and use it for their own purposes is very advantageous for power structures. So there's an acknowledgement there out in mainstream media that this is going on. Do you remember me saying at the beginning that it was kind of a really fraught area of research? There's information, there's really good information actually, there's disinformation, and I've kind of put together a slide to articulate this concept. Here's poor little me, about a year ago, trying to get to the truth. Geoengineering is also known as solar radiation management. It's also known as stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, SAG. It's also known as weather modification in different contexts, and the states are going on about climate remediation. Semantics, it's a semantics game, it's a word play game to throw people off the track. You throw in some persistent contrails, some chemtrails, some EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, and here it gets interesting. You throw in the aliens, the conspiracy theories, paranormal, the UFO stuff, the astrology. So what people do is go chemtrails, Google, Wikipedia, and it says, yeah, it's a conspiracy theory. So what happens is the truth becomes kind of obscure. It's so difficult. As somebody looking at this, with a normal 9 to 5, to get to the point where they're comfortable to speak out and not feel ridiculed, or even if they do, they've gone beyond it. I kind of went beyond it a while ago, started to talk to some friends. They kind of thought I was nuts. But after a while, when you get to the heart of this issue, you kind of transcend all of that to a degree. So I've put together an A4 sheet to kind of steer you away from some of the other stuff. Interesting as they are, I must say, all of the subjects kind of up there are interesting in their own right. So when you get past all of that, when you steer past, you navigate through all of the smokescreen, alien stuff, you actually get some really good info. This was a report by the Belfort Group in 2010. This is a kind of scientific study on contrail science, and it was reviewed by Dr. Vermeeren, I think, and he was an aerospace engineer at Delft University in Holland, and he put his stamp on it, basically saying, "Yep, it all holds up. It all holds up." And then he passed that to a Belgian mayor, and the mayor then put it in front of the United Nations, NATO, and a host of embassies to no avail. A.C. Griffiths, if I introduce you to this guy, very courageous guy, very courageous. He's no longer with us. He started talking about all sorts of issues. He used to work for the CIA. He did work for the CIA. He did some work for the US Air Force and the NSA, the National Security Agency in the States. And yeah, he held the cryptographic clearance for various things, and one of them was the Project Cloverleaf. And for those of you who know, Project Cloverleaf is the name given by the military and the pilots to this geoengineering program. So yeah, quote, the aerosol program, the chemtrail program. I'm actually talking about getting inside the program at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where it's being managed. And there are numerous. Again, on the data sheet, I'll give you some guides to other whistleblowers. And again, good information. You get past all the smoke screening stuff and you start to find patents that talk about stratospheric Welsbach seeding for reduction of global warming. Now, Welsbach materials are oxides of metals. So in this patent 5003186, it talks about adding tiny particles to fuel of jetliners, being aluminium oxide, thorium oxide, and it talks about the size of them being 10 to 100 microns. You'd expect to find academic studies, and again, there are many. In 2010, the BBC spoke about a study by Hayward et al. In 2009, and it's called A Case Study of the Radiative Forcing of Persistent Contrails Evolving into Contrail-Induced Cirrus. So that they can't use chemtrails in academia. And this is a good one. I want you to follow this. There, again, apologise for the quality, but down the east coast, we see the circles laid by military aircraft, and these are the circles that they're wanting to observe. Now, these are persistent jet contrails, chemtrails. The T's you see here are the tracers. So where they cross will be, again, the data values, so they can see what the wind is doing at the altitude. And I'll run this in increments of half-hour steps. So that's half an hour later, 1 hour later, 1.5, 2 hours, 2.5 hours later. So pretty much, with the addition of some other chemtrails here, the most of the central and East Midlands, all the way up to Newcastle and the south, the Isle of Wight, is covered in man-made cloud. 2.5 hours. So what's happening, I'm finding, is you wake up and you see some, really big spread contrails by 6 o'clock in the morning, and you see some lighter ones go over 7, 8 o'clock, and then bam, 11 o'clock. It's either hazy or the low-level cumulus cloud comes in and you can't see what's going on above. Right, I'm going to firstly congratulate you, actually. One of the reasons when you engage with people with this, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. Who wants to know about bad news? Nobody. So I congratulate you. We're not talking about a Euro lottery win and each of you got $500,000 to spend on houses and cars and stuff. I think a lot of you came here this evening expecting to hear kind of challenging bad news. So yeah, it's commendable because a lot of people just don't want to come into this area. And the good news is this. You hear people go, yeah, but what can we do? What can we do? And government wants us to feel, totally apathetic to all of this. The Solar Radiation Management Governance Initiative, again, funded by the Royal Society, they govern the issues around geoengineering and how to approach the public with it, those kind of issues. You can get some meeting minutes, and they're governed by a set of principles called the Chatham House Rules. And for those of you who are looking into, societies, old societies, Chatham House, fascinating. I thoroughly recommend you look at, the Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Again, another talk. So if you Google SRMGI, so Radiation Management Governance Initiative, goals, concerns, principles regarding SRM research, you get this link and it takes you to a PDF, and it's the meeting minutes, and they're all kind of P's. And the Chatham House rules are, you can report what's being said, but you can't report who's saying it. In yellow, talking about geoengineering, it says, involve general public because A, they pay for it, B, they have the power to stop it. Keep them informed, and this is another icky one, keep them informed of what geoengineering is, but don't necessarily ask their permission. Go ahead and do it, essentially, when you read between the lines. So the good news of this is they acknowledge that we do have some kind of leverage if we take the right channels, the right approach, we talk to people, we inform people the correct way. So it sounds a bit cheesy, but knowledge, and I've put can be power, because it's not always power, because knowledge is nothing unless you share it or you act upon it in some way. So you can do something, I believe. And the first step is, as I said, none of this is kind of any true value unless you look into it yourself to a degree. I'm not asking you to believe me. It would be nice, but I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you essentially to kind of do your own poking around, please. And you have to understand counterintelligence, and this is a big part of it, you know, the smokescreen stuff. One of the basic principles of counterintelligence techniques that the military use and media use is that when you want a piece of intelligence to be countered, what you do is you put somebody else up talking about the same stuff, Mr. B, or whatever his name is. Yeah, you know, geoengineering's really bad, the government's really bad, aliens, you know. And by association, I'm going to be taken out with him. I'm going to be made crazy. Oh yeah, that David guy, he talks about geoengineering as well. Same as the alien guy. So we have to up our game and our understanding of how to conduct research and how counterintelligence works. That's a key part. We have to become a little bit smarter, I think, generally. And once you know what's going on, you can spread the word. We've got new media, which is a fantastic tool. I don't particularly like Facebook, but it has its place in some instances. You can take action to start protecting your health. There are some good kind of detoxing programs and compounds that you can take. Join a community group. So yeah, with the new media stuff, you can join a community and help out. This is too big for me to tackle on my own. Way too big. I've met some really good people in the field who I'm kind of working with towards doing something with this. So one of my calls to action this evening is that if anybody has any skills or time, whether it's half an hour a week or whether it's 3, 4, 5 hours a week, help me, please. We're putting together a framework where it doesn't matter what skill sets you have, you slot into a kind of framework, whether it's IT, whether it's putting together kind of research, little tasks or whatever. So yeah, eventually when all of that kind of culminates, you can start to feel a bit more empowered actually to say no. So the tools that we've got in place, we've got a Unified Atmospheric Preservation Act, the UAPA, that is going to go online as a petition. I'm completing a directive that I want to present to the House of Commons with my group, who have done a lot of legwork on putting together a directive. I co-founded the International Directive to ban geoengineering. There are many national groups out there doing their own thing, which is fantastic. Some US groups doing great stuff, some Australian, New Zealand, other parts, Italy. There's some great groups in the UK actually, London, Kent. But there's nothing out there at the moment that unifies all of this. And I'm trying to do something about that with some colleagues. This is my puppy, the British Association for the Prevention of Geoengineering. And I've kind of set this up as a professional entity stroke forum for professional people, academics, researchers, politicians, industry professionals, to kind of create a safe environment for those people to start talking about this. Stigmatization is incredible. And I've got a personal story. I can't go into it totally because I'm still with Reading University, but I can tell you this, that when I approached the university with my new findings, with my holistic understanding of how this fits into the bigger picture and geopolitics and history and weather science, meteorology, population reduction, social regime, I was expecting them to say, no, hang on David, you got it wrong. But they didn't. I'm going to put a personal website up. I bought davidlim.com. It's not live yet, but this is kind of where I will have my personal information. So we've spoken about it. It's not difficult. I'm sure once you have got to grips with this stuff, you can do exactly what I'm doing. And if you can't, I will help you. I just have one last slide very quickly, and there's some people that I need to thank actually, and probably in this order as well, because my wife has put up with me harping on about this stuff, constantly for the past year or so. I've spent way too much time away from the house, and when you enter this kind of area, it's infectious. Actually, it's addictive because people want to know the truth. Researchers, I've got a lot of information from Michael Murphy, Dane Wigginton, Scott Stevens, Rosalind Peterson, G. Edward Griffin, Alan Watt. Alex Longman is a colleague of mine who I'm working with through the CP UK, and I'd like to thank you. So thank you very much. Thanks for your attention indeed. I hope you enjoyed the introductory talk to geoengineering. It was more an overview of the subject for those who know absolutely nothing or very little. There is a datasheet that I refer to in the talk, so if you would like a copy of that, email me, let me know who you are, and I'll endeavour to get a copy out to you. The sheet just has some links and references to the information that I've used. There was a questions and answer session as well after the talk. It lasted an hour and a half, so I've left it off this clip just to keep it manageable. Please help me try and get the word out on geoengineering. I personally believe it's got some huge impacts for all of us in the near future if it's not addressed. So email this link to friends and colleagues and try and help me get the word out on this one. Thanks for watching. Look after yourselves and bye for now.